Welcome to this session, Writing Our Lives. Scott Fitzgerald once remarked that the rich are not like you and me, to which Hemingway responded, yes, they have more money. This is what I say about the three writers who you see on the stage with me. They have more words, they have more imagination, they have more heart. Their concerns are universal. The questions they pose and the solutions they offer apply to all of us universally. They have a unique capacity not only to portray what is seen, but to imagine what is unseen, what lies beneath, what could be, what should be. Writers are tuned to register pertinent absences of things, and this gives them a soft kind of power to introduce ambiguity into concepts we thought were settled once and for all. They can puncture holes into accepted dogmas. They can question creeds. And this has the capacity to recognize and empower the individual. Here is one of my perpetual problems that I'm sure many of you are already aware of. Sheikh ji महफिले रिंदा में बहुत आए गए. Sheikh ji started frequenting the pub. Sheikh ji महफिले रिंदा में बहुत आए गए. खू से लाचार थे, कुछ वाज भी फरमाए गए. Helpless and powerless in front of old habits, started speechifying. खू से लाचार थे, कुछ वाज भी फरमाए गए. आखिरश पां से वो इस तरह निकलवाए गए. दस्त बदस्ते दिगरे, पा बदस्ते दिगरे. Sheikh ji started frequenting the pub. Powerless in front of old habits, started speechifying. Promptly, he was ejected with a resounding thud, some gripping his arms and some his legs. So most of you know I have this bad habit of speechifying myself. But this session really belongs to the three amazing women here on stage with me. Let me start by thanking the people who make it possible for us to come together in such a splendid space in the heart of the best city in the world, of course, after Karachi. And maybe Lahore. To dear Rachel Cooper at Asia Society, and to the founders of Lahore Literary Festival, Razi, who's here, and Nussi and Anila, who are not, let me say, Zindabad. Thank you from all of us. I also want to thank my friends Marina and Shaukat, who are here, and Ambassador Rafat Mehdi and Anis, who are not, for really no reason except that I adore them, and my presence here is thanks to their friendship and their support. Now to business. The participants of this session agreed on a sort of loose agenda, first proposed by Surayya and wholeheartedly welcomed by all of us. I'm going to ask each one of them to take 5 minutes to introduce the book they are here for, read from it if they want, or just tell us the story behind the story, how the book came about, what compelled them to put pen to paper. And once the writers finished with their introduction, I will ask each of them one question. All this should take us about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we can open the session to audience participation. I hope there'll be plenty of time for that. Let me start with someone I feel so fortunate to call a friend of many years, someone I admire and respect deeply, my beloved Professor Tahira Naqvi. She grew up in Lahore, Pakistan. She's a translator, writer, and clinical professor in the Department of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at NYU, where she teaches Urdu language and literature. She's translated into English works by Munshi Prem Chand, Saadat Hasan Manto, Khadija Mastoor, Hajra Masroor, the poet Fahmida Riaz, and the majority of works by Ismat Chughtai. She's published 2 collections of short stories titled consecutively Attar of Roses and Other Stories of Pakistan, as well as Dying in a Strange Country. Her first novel, The History Teacher of Lahore, launched in March of 2024 at the LLF, was published last year by Speaking Tiger Books, Delhi, and reprinted this year by City Press, Karachi. I'll read a comment from her publisher. From Sialkot to Lahore, Arif Ali makes the journey to realize his dream of being a history teacher. In Lahore, his life is upended by dramatic events unfolding in light of a general wielding far-right power after the brutal assassination of a prime minister. As a teacher, he resists the decree to teach a false history. And as a poet, he articulates his emotions on unrequited love and the turbulent political atmosphere. Professor Tahira Naqvi.
So much, Azra, and thank you, LLF and Asia Society, and Razi. I'm just going to read a very short portion of a chapter, and perhaps later we can talk about it. And I'll have to take these glasses off because these are not reading glasses. Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. Jean-Paul Sartre. Around 12, Arif arrived at the house from where he had been instructed to collect David. The street was plunged in silence. A smell of putrid rain struck his nose with force as he approached the house. From a lamppost in the distance, a shaft of murky light fell across the street, just enough to discern the small house, separated by a narrow gully from other box-like cramped dwellings, set side by side and one on top of another. Nadira had warned that he would have to go all the way down to the end of the street, and once there, diligently count the doors. It was the third on the right. Counting doors in semi-darkness was difficult, but he did his best, and rattling the chain on the door he thought was the one, waited. Several minutes later, just as he was about to start counting again, he heard the sound of running feet on stairs. Then the sound of bolts being drawn back. The door yielded after a few squeaks. A young man's face materialized. Behind him, darkness. "Who is it?" the man inquired in a cautious tone. Feeling the chill of fear, Arif cleared his throat and whispered, "Arif." Nadira had said to quickly give his name. They were speaking in Punjabi. "Wait." The face was withdrawn and the door shut. More time passed. Footsteps again. The door opened a crack. "Arif?" A man's questioning voice, different from the first, gruff, less cautious. "Yes, I'm here for David." In the next instant, a boy was slowly pushed out through the half-open door, and the door was shut again, quickly. "David?" Arif asked gently, peering at the boy's face. He was dressed in a grey shalwar kameez, a black sweater, wore a woolen hat, and a scarf was wrapped around his neck. "Yes," the voice, hesitant, timid. Taking hold of David's hand, Arif began walking toward the section of the street where the rickshaw had dropped him earlier. The boy's hand was cold and clammy. After a few minutes' walk, they were in Hira Mandi. Arif had been here once during his first year in Lahore. At the insistence of some college friends, he had come to a kota to listen to music and remembered well the cramped dancing spaces, gaudily illuminated and noisy, the sounds of lively music and discordant singing, a jarring admixture, the bustling streets, men of every ilk milling about, rubbing shoulders with each other. A gentle tug at his hand as they maneuvered a pothole made him look down at his ward. David remained quiet, his eyes apprehensive, his manner deferential. Of medium height, thin and handsome, his dark, wavy hair cut short and combed back, he looked older than 10 and could have been one of the students at Government Model School. His name could have been Kamal, Ehsan, or Qasim. He could be Muslim, Ahmadi, or Shia, and his appearance would be the same. Arif wanted to shield him, to protect him, not only now, but forever. At this moment, there was nothing he wouldn't do for the boy.
Beautiful, thank you. That was great. One of my favorite parts, actually. I recommend this book. You guys won't be able to put it down if you haven't read it already. I think I finished it in like two sittings. It's suspenseful. It has, you puncture through all kinds of stereotypes. So let me ask you a question about something that occurred to me reading your book. Walter Benjamin says that the role of the artist is to resist submission to popular movements and liberate the future from its deformation in the presence of an act of cognition. So you're really correcting the present as well as the future. My question for you is, do you agree? Should writers have a purpose, or is it okay to just write a book without having a social agenda or a political agenda or any agenda?
I will say that, sorry, I forget this. Sorry about that. I will say that I haven't consciously, or I did not consciously think about this as I was writing the novel, or when I was writing my short stories earlier. I think that we are each driven by some kind of a knowledge of purpose that we have when we write something, especially fiction. And there is always a kind of period during which things percolate in your head, and they've been there for a very long time. And for me, it was, of course, first, that I happened to chance upon the works of Coetzee and Nadine Gordimer in America when I came here. And that totally changed the way I looked at literature. I had been nursed on British literature, which was wonderful. You know, Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte and Thomas Hardy and the rest. So this was a complete change for me, and I said, oh my God, I wish I could write like these two. But of course, I don't write like them. But there was something that it brought to my attention regarding purpose and politics, for which I had hardly had any real interest in. And so I think that began for me the idea that you could write about something that was disturbing, and that was disturbing publicly, and it was disturbing for you as a person. And of course, added to that were all of these other things that were happening in Lahore, in Pakistan at that time, that had to do with the persecution of the minorities. And one of those minorities is me, the Shia. And after that, of course, I just started to read about it. So I will not say that I sat down one fine morning and said, I'm going to write about what is disturbing me. I think that as a writer, you just put everything together, and the past and remembrance and memory and the future and recent events, all of these things sort of come together and propel the narrative forward.
Beautiful. Very well said. I couldn't agree more. By the way, a part of my duty at Columbia University is training of young doctors who are like medical students, residents, fellows, but even wannabe doctors. Undergrads are always hanging around with me in clinic because they want to. And many times the young doctors will ask me, Dr. Raza, what should I do to really become a good doctor? I mean, you can imagine these kids are coming to Columbia, they think they're halfway to pick up their Nobel Prizes already. So, but to be a good doctor doesn't mean just to have a high IQ. You have to have this special thing. And you know what I tell them is to read fiction. Poetry, I'd love to say, but it would be too hard because it requires, I'm still reading Ghalib after spending a whole lifetime trying to interpret. But you know, with fiction, the whole idea is that you can poach on the experience of others. You can stand on the shoes of others and you can feel their pain, and it helps you develop empathy for people and an understanding. For example, The Great Gatsby is not about adultery. It's about that life is complicated. Decisions you make are very complicated. There's ambiguity in everything. But for me, another thing fiction does, by the way, and reading your book brought home so many of these things, is it gives you insight into yourself. Because with each character that's introduced to you in the novel, you either like them, you don't like them, you love them, you declare yourself. And then you think about, well, why did I do that? What is it about me, you know, that's making me like this one and hate this one? So it's a way of not just connecting with the rest of the world, but with yourself. So I really constantly am reading fiction as well, trying to educate myself, because it's just never enough. So I am such a great admirer of all three of you who are writing fiction. Let me introduce now Dur-e-Aziz Amna, who's a Pakistani writer based in Newark, New Jersey. Her debut novel, American Fever, won the SABA award and the APALA award for literature. Her work has appeared in the Financial Times, Al Jazeera, Dawn, and others. She's a graduate of Yale College and the University of Michigan's MFA program. The name of her book is American Fever. A synopsis is that on a year-long exchange program in rural Oregon, a Pakistani student, a 16-year-old Hira, must swap Kashmiri chai for volleyball practice and try to understand why everyone around her seems to dislike Obama. A skeptically witty narrator, Hira finds herself stuck between worlds. The experience is memorable for reasons both good and bad. A first kiss, new friends, racism, Islamophobia, homesickness. Along the way, Hira starts to feel increasingly unwell until she begins coughing up blood and receives a diagnosis of tuberculosis, pushing her into quarantine and turning her newly established home away from home upside down. American Fever is a compelling and a laugh-out-loud, funny novel about adolescence, family, otherness, religion, the push and pull of home. It marks the entrance on the international literary scene of the brilliant, fresh voice of Dur-e-Aziz Amna.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And thank you, Razi, Rachel, LLF, for hosting this wonderful day here. And it's truly such an honor. I was telling Azra before, I've watched her videos for many, many years of her reciting Urdu poetry in a way that just makes you feel like you are outside your body. I'm such an admirer of your work, of Sorayya's, who I've read for so long, and so it's truly such an honor and a privilege to be here. So I think that because the synopsis for my book, which is American Fever, was quite thorough, I think I will sort of leave aside any more details that I had about the book in mind and just do a quick reading from it instead. So I think the only thing that you really need to know, besides what you know already, is that Hira, she's a teenager. She is born and raised in Rawalpindi, and she moves from there to a very rural setting in Oregon. And while she's there, she's hosted by a family. The host mother's name is Kelly, and the host sister's name is Amy. And I think that's all you need to know. And I'm also thinking of this passage because it sort of links to what you said about the literature that we sort of were nursed on, as you said, as Pakistanis writing mostly in English. Okay. My first class was English Lit with Amy and the rest of the juniors. So she's in high school and she joins the junior class there. The other two exchange students, a boy from Oman and a girl from France, had opted for sophomore English, but Kelly had called ahead about my placement. She has to be in the same class as Amy, she told the superintendent. Her English is so good, he will be amazed. My first 2 weeks in Oregon, I struggled to express myself, telling Ammi over the phone that living in English felt like wearing shadi ke kapde to bed. Kelly, however, interrupted me often to marvel at my sentences, asking me what that word I had just used meant and how I had learned such good English. I detailed for her the length of British rule in the subcontinent, but felt irritated at the lowliness of her expectations. I was used to my parents with their painfully high standards, who, when they called to tell me my O-level grades had come back all A's, sounded happy but unsurprised. I didn't want to be patted on the back for knowing what fecundity meant. Since then, I have developed other theories of why certain foreigners get offended at being complimented on their English, objectively a pleasant appraisal and a reasonable one given that many people in their home countries who don't speak the language at all. Raised in places standing in the long imperial shadow of English, we are taught to peg our worth to how well we know the language. I had grown up reading only in English, respecting teachers more when they instructed in English, envying Dawn TV anchors when they delivered the news in clipped English. I claim the language dearly, and it made me angry that someone could question my right to it, even in compliment. In class, I rifled through the heavy textbook, worried. Poe, Thoreau, Arthur Miller, I had never heard these names. My literary world had consisted of Dickens and the Brontes, Blyton and Austen, books set in the English countryside, pubs and boarding schools. That, by the way, is a clear sign of class. If you were reading Blyton in 90s Pakistan, you were undoubtedly the bourgeoisie. The only American I had read was Nathaniel Hawthorne, and that because the Scarlet Letter was part of a gender studies course Ammi half-heartedly took once. She stopped attending the evening classes after a week, citing exhaustion from her day job. I, on the other hand, remained enrolled, sneaking the readings upstairs at night, learning at age 12 about female genital mutilation in African countries and the misogynistic machinations of the burqa, becoming a gullible convert to Western feminism at a tender age. My worry subsided soon after class began. The teacher, a lean man with a graying mustache, asked the students what they remembered of Emerson from sophomore year. Such silence ensued that I could hear the superintendent scold a student in the hallway. Mr. Avery resumed talking after a brief pause. He seemed to have expected the silence. He gave a short summary of Emerson's life and then said, "Samantha, why don't you read out the first paragraph of Self-Reliance for us?" Samantha sighed and began to recite Emerson in the dull register of the condemned. "A little louder," said Mr. Avery cheerfully, annoying me. Why wasn't he telling Samantha she was eating half her words and sounded like an idiot? After she finished her paragraph, Mr. Avery looked around and asked, "Who wants to read next?" I raised my hand out of habit. We clamored to get selected for recitations back home before realizing I was the only one who had. Everyone stared, including Amy. Even the teacher looked with suspicion at my lone hand, suspended limply in the air. Amy avoided my gaze in the next 2 classes. I had never been the most popular girl in school, but I was sufficiently liked. Back home, there was considerable cachet to being a good student, and that had always been. Things seemed to work differently in Lakeview, where students spent much of their energy vying to appear disinterested in class, in a race for the most authentic brand of NOA.
Brilliant. One of my favorite essays by Emerson, Self-Reliance, so beautiful. It's the exact opposite of what you would think he's saying, self-reliance. I always think of the Ghalib couplet, if you don't mind my reciting that. Kya kiya Khizr ne Sikandar se? What did Khizr do to Sikandar? What did he do? They had gone out to find the elixir of immortality together. They get separated because of bad weather, and Khizr, who's a prophet, finds it, imbibes it, and becomes immortal. And poor Alexander died at what, 32 years of age or something? Kya kiya Khizr ne Sikandar se, ab kise rehnuma kare koi? Look what Khizr did to Sikandar. Who can we depend on to guide us anymore? Even if a prophet could betray you and imbibe the thing yourself and leave you out there. So the normal interpretation of this couplet is that you can't depend even on a prophet. So what should you do? Well, you should rely on yourself. Kind of the self-reliance essay, this Emerson's essay has this title, Self-Reliance. But when my co-conspirator and co-author, Sarah Suleri Goodyear, and I were doing our Ghalib book, and we came to this couplet, we said, no, that's too simplistic. Ghalib would never settle for something, such a message, self-reliance, never. And we kept reading this couplet for a couple of days, till it dawned on us that he's saying exactly the opposite. It's really the loss of a moral compass. Ghalib is saying anytime you start to feel self-satisfied and complacent, that, wow, now I can only rely on myself, I have the answer, remind yourself, kya kiya Khizr ne Sikandar se. In other words, even Theodore Adorno, the great philosopher, said the highest kind of morality is to be a little uncomfortable in your own home. Remain skeptical always. And this is actually the message of self-reliance by Emerson. It's the exact opposite of what people think. No, you can't, in order to rely yourself, you have to really connect with the world and understand the world. To understand one person means you have to swallow the world, no? Okay. So the question here for Dur-e-Aziz. Something I wonder about very often. If I absolutely loved a novel and don't know anything about the author, but I just loved the novel, and then I found out something heinous about the writer. I mean, something really horrible like, oh, he's a pedophile. Should it matter? In other words, can I separate the dancer from the dance?
Somehow I thought this was going to be about me, and I got very, very... I don't know if other people did too, but yeah, I will assume that it's not. So it's so funny because I think this sort of relates to the question that you posed, Professor Naqvi, which was the question of whether we can separate morality from art as an artist. And to that, I don't think you can at all. I think that we as humans, and maybe particularly so as artists, are obsessed with right and wrong, and I don't think that we will ever escape that question. The sort of, it's only a matter of how nuanced and complex we want to make that morality. But I don't think that you can ever write good literature that is not obsessed with morality. And it's funny that I say that, but also at the same time, I think that you should be able to separate a writer as a person from the art that they produce. Partly, I think, because the amount of information that we have about anyone remains so incomplete, and I think that the age that we live in has sort of convinced us that we do have all the information, and so it has made it easier to make judgments, even though knowing how complex, if we think of ourselves as complex human beings, and we sort of give that credit to everyone around us, it is absolutely impossible to know anything about an artist beyond what we see of them in the book that they have produced, or in the music that they have produced, or in a painting. So I think, and I think it's becoming more and more unpopular of an opinion, but I think that you can separate the art from the artist.
Okay, we need to meet after this. But thank you. Very thoughtful answer. Surriya Khan is the author of We Take Our Cities With Us, a memoir and 3 novels. Noor, 5 Queens Road, and City of Spies, which won Best Fiction Book Award at the 2015 Sharjah International Book Fair. Her work has appeared in publications including Lit Hub, Long Reads, The Rumpus, Guernica, Electric Lit, and North American Review. She's the daughter of a Pakistani father and a Dutch mother, was born in Europe, grew up in Pakistan, now lives in Ithaca, New York. She's a visiting critic at Cornell University and at work on a new novel. About the book, We Take Our Cities With Us. Even when we leave them, our cities never leave us. After her Dutch mother's death, Surriya confronts her grief by revisiting their relationship, her parents' lives, and her own Pakistani-Dutch heritage in a multicultural memoir that unfolds over 7 cities and 3 continents. We Take Our Cities With Us ushers us from Khan's childhood independence forged at her grandparents' home in Lahore to her adolescence in Pakistan's new capital Islamabad to Syracuse and Ithaca, New York, where Khan finds her footing as the mother of young brown sons in post-9/11 America, to her birthplace, Vienna, where her parents die, and finally to Amsterdam and Maastricht, where the cities of her mother's conflicted youth. In Khan's gripping telling of her immigrant experience, she shows us what it is to raise children and lose parents in worlds other than your own. Drawing on family history, geopolitics, and art in this stunning story of loss, identity, and rediscovery, Khan beautifully illuminates the complexities of our evolving global world and its most important constant, love. Surriya.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you in the audience. And it's really a pleasure and an honor to be on this stage with the 3 of you. I have a few remarks. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the backstory of my memoir. And if there's time, if the timer hasn't gone off yet, I'll read a short paragraph from the memoir. I'm a novelist who recently wrote a memoir that weaves together loss and heritage across the cities of my life. I didn't expect to write memoir, although I've used personal memories as a springboard for story and character in my fiction. We Take Our Cities With Us began as a We Take Our Cities With Us began as a collection of essays in response to a question writers are often asked about their novels. Is it true? Did it happen? I decided to explore the what happened that inspired one of my novels, only to discover that the essay I wrote had as much to do with place, Lahore, as people, my family. I soon had the idea of writing one essay for each city in my life. As all of us here today, I have many cities. My mother was Dutch, my father was Pakistani, I was born in Vienna, Austria, grew up in Islamabad, came to the US, where I live still. It's a mouthful, and my sister warns me that the list is best clipped when you meet somebody new. But when I finished my essay collection, surprises awaited me. My mother, who'd passed away, was all over my pages. The cities I'd consigned to their own chapters would not stay in them. Sometimes Islamabad, Vienna, and Maastricht all appeared not only in the same chapter, but in the same paragraph or sentence. Finally, despite my intent to follow chronological time, time was so difficult to apprehend. There was my grandmother, squatting on the kitchen floor, rinsing rice in a tin. And there were my children, who'd never met her, climbing on the school bus on the other side of the world decades later, all in the same paragraph. What to do? As far as I could see, the only remedy was to surrender to what was on the page, to allow my mother, cities, and memory to exist on the page the way they exist in my mind, and therefore to weave a whole of parts to try and make something new. So I rewrote that collection into a memoir that covers several decades and many cities, not only mine, but I added my mother's, Maastricht, and Amsterdam to the mix as well. That vision became We Take Our Cities With Us. Colm Tóibín gave a brilliant reading in Ithaca the other day. He was asked why in his novels he uses a real setting, a particular stretch of shoreline, the Strand, on Ireland's coast, rather than just making something up. He said he didn't use an imaginary name or disguise his setting because the Strand brings with it a depth of emotion, a landscape of its own that he and also his characters cannot do without. I know that feeling. For years, I was obsessed with writing about Islamabad during a certain period because of what that place evoked in my mind. I think memory operates in a similar way to what Tóibín was suggesting about place. A single memory, like a single line in a poem, can evoke or contain a whole world or make a whole novel. And in my memoir, memories and places are my anchors. Quickly, I'll just read one paragraph. I last saw 5 Queens Road on a visit with my father in the 1980s during a summer I was home from graduate school. My mother thought we were mad to drive all the way to Lahore and all the way back to visit a place that no longer existed. Said so before we'd even left Islamabad. What? You're driving 5 hours each way for one night? Never mind, my father said. I have things to do in Lahore as well. But you're taking her? You could just go there yourself with your camera. But I want to go, I said. Why don't you come with us, my darling? My father asked. Come on, to see an empty plot of land? To check that it's still there? My father laughed with her. "Are you worried you'll forget the place? Do you think that's possible?" she asked me. I did not. I didn't yet know how memory worked, that things you think you'll never forget are gone one day, and mundane ones, like the sound of the gas water heater coming on in 5 Queens Road, never leave you.
That was so beautiful, Surriya. And
Thank you so
much. 2 years ago, what happened to me, guys, is that one of my friends, who's a professor of English, Sharon Cameron, said to me, "Azra, how is it possible that you haven't read Proust? I'm just ordering Swan's Way for you right now." And she ordered Swan's Way for me. And of course, then you get hooked onto Proust, and you have to read all 6 volumes of In Search of Lost Time. But the idea is that Proust, who happened to be a real dandy in French society at the time, Parisian darling of drawing rooms, etc., dips a Madeleine cookie in his tea and takes a taste, and the taste takes him back. The memories that that Madeleine cookie has brought back to him actually form the basis of this, the most beautiful thing in literature probably ever written. And it is considered such a masterpiece, and for a very good reason. So I actually went through and really enjoyed every line, and the importance of memory and how it is invoked in us in so many ways, what you were talking about. I wish we had more time, because Sarah and I constantly talked about memory as well. And Edward Said, my other friend, loved talking about memory. But let me ask you the question, very related to what you just actually read. Memoirs are the backstairs of history. Memories die with their owner, but memoirs live on. Since you wrote one, obviously, you think that memories need to be shared. The question is, which ones? The ones about your public life, your private life, or what Garcia Marquez calls your secret life? And which ones do you share in a memoir, and which do you put in autofiction?
You know, this question about memoir, we think about memoir being its own genre, right? That it's very private and it's very intimate, and the author is really revealing, in a sense, something very personal. But as a novelist, I think that over the years I've come to see that novels are actually, the process of writing a novel and the process of reading somebody else's novel is actually a very intimate act, right? A novel allows us a glimpse into somebody else's mind, into their love, into what love means for them, what death means for them, I mean, what everything means to them. And in that way, it's extremely intimate. I was horrified when I first started to write a memoir. I thought, how can I possibly do this in an honest and in a vulnerable way? But it seems to me that one of the real gifts of writing memoir has been to understand more deeply the relationship between fiction and memoir, and that in both cases, it's really about story. And so, in a sense, when you were asking the question about how do we decide what memories to reveal as a memoirist, we have that problem as novelists as well. We have all this information, and the job of the writer is to decide what to take from here to put in here. And you can't do everything. One has to figure out what the storyline is, what the narrative arc is, what the spine is, let's say, of a narrative. And for me, and for the memoir, I found, because my writing coincided with the loss of my mother and her illness, I found the spine of the memoir was my mother's illness. And so when I had originally written this collection of essays, I had much more information than I used then in this memoir. I had to cull and, try to figure out what pieces fit together. So, the process of writing a memoir was, in fact, not so different than writing a novel.
Beautiful. That's exactly why I asked you, what do you put in a memoir and what do you put in autofiction? Because fiction in the end has so much of your own experiences. By the way, I of course wrote a book on cancer, which is called The First Cell and the Human Costs of Pursuing Cancer to the Last. And in this book, I have taken really a look at everything to do with cancer, the entire paradigm of cancer, but through the prism of human anguish. And so this means that I was really taking a look at what we are doing to patients through the patient's eyes and their experiences, that I'm seeing 30 to 40 cancer patients every week in my clinic, and I'm walking most of them to their terminal stages. And what is it that we do to them as we walk them through? And then with the granularity with which I was describing their pain and suffering and the malevolence of the disease that they are faced with, I realized suddenly that, it's kind of insincere and dishonest of me to be talking in such details about my patients and then yet holding back my own story. Because I lost my own husband to cancer. And so I went back and started to put my own story in this cancer book. And once I started, Harvey's story runs like a red line through every chapter, because then you can't escape it. And that's what memory did to me. And a cancer book became a memoir in a way also, that Harvey had been dead for 20 years already. My daughter was only, Shehrzad was 4 years old when he was diagnosed. So it wasn't like I had been talking about, never talked about it. But that's what really happened to me, Tahira. So I think the three of you have given such thoughtful responses to my very difficult questions. And I feel really much wiser as a result of this discussion with each one of you. So I want to thank you for writing these books, for being such amazing women, role models, and let's give them a hand, everyone. And I think we have run out of time. Okay. We'll take one or two questions.
First of all, for your excellent panel. And mine is really a question for all the writers, and thank you for creating this space for us. You spoke about Walter Benjamin, Adorno, and the whole Frankfurt School, right? And the role of collective memory, as each one of you have done so beautifully in your own work, using that notion of witnessing your past, writing about that, understanding that within the present, and creating a space for the future, a very organic process. So my question to all three of you is, what is the role of collective memory and the role of witnessing and paying witness to, which each one of you have done so brilliantly in your work, to the young writers from the Global South? Because each one of you, and I know, Tahira, you said it, spoke about Jane Austen, you spoke about Emerson, and the universities where our students, and I myself was educated, are taught and we are taught to learn the canon, our literature programs, our MFA programs, and those are from a very Western epistemological sense, right? So how do we, in our own sort of spaces, with our own students, create the spaces that you all are creating that validate their own experiences, that under these programs right now, intentionally exclude them?
Thank you. Good question. We have run out of time, but I will ask one of you to, Tahira, let's take age before beauty, and age and beauty combined in Tahira. Pick up your microphone, Tahira. Professor, Tahira, pick up your microphone.
This light is like, if I understand your question, you're asking how we can move from the Western canon or Western writing so that we can introduce our students to a different kinds of writing, a variety, a diversity in terms of, is that what you were asking? So we can't. I mean, the curriculums are already set up, and I teach, I'm supposed to be teaching advanced Urdu 1 and 2. And instead of teaching advanced Urdu 1 and 2 for the last God knows how many years, I have been quietly and, without making a big fuss about it, teaching readings in Urdu literature, which is not advanced Urdu 1 and 2. It's not language, it's a literature course. So I introduce my students to Iqbal and Ghalib and Faiz and Fahmida Riaz, etc. So these are private choices that we in the academia will have to make. Otherwise, if someone is watching over your shoulder, you cannot do that. You may, as a teacher, introduce subjects, introduce by way of reference and contextualize things for them. But I think one of the ways in which all of us can do this is perhaps talk to students outside of the classroom, privately, as parents, as relatives, as grandmothers, as aunts, as uncles. I also did not just learn from the British school. I have read extensively Urdu literature. I was reading Manto and Ismat Chughtai and A.R. Khatun and, a host, I mentioned them, memory brings it all back, so I mentioned them in my novel. So I had that privilege. And I was not taught them in school. I was given access to all of that at home. So I don't know if I answer your question the way you wanted me to answer it, but perhaps...
No, I think we run out of time, so thank you so much. Everyone, I think you'll be signing your books outside, and welcome to corner the authors and ask your questions outside. We don't want to usurp other people's time. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you. That was wonderful.